Welcome to the Taking the Leap podcast, where you can learn how to launch your full-time career in this part-time gig economy. No matter what career you're in, you have the potential to be the best version of you and overcome whatever obstacles stand in your way. And now, here's your host, the CEO of Bonvera, Bob Dickey.
I'm super excited to have Tim and Brandy Jarvinen join me today at our offices here in Knoxville, Tennessee, in our makeshift studio in the conference room. Tim, I have really enjoyed building a relationship and friendship with you over a number of years. You and I served together at Bonvera in board capacities. You're a co-owner and founder of this company, and I've really enjoyed getting to see how you think and process and analyze information, and you've been just instrumental in the leadership and development of the company. So I'm really, first of all, I just want to say welcome. Thanks for being here. And your beautiful bride is sitting right next to you, and she's off to the corner. She's like, "Don't ask me any questions. This is just Bob and Tim kind of riffing today." But who knows? Maybe we'll invite her in, and
she's definitely here to improve the overall looks.
There you go, yeah. For sure. And at the other end of the table, we've got Casey and the rest of the tech staff. And so what we've got to do is we have to figure out how you and I can just kind of zone out of all the other things that are going on in here and just kind of sit back and talk. But I've got a number of questions I want to ask you and kind of tease out some stuff. But one of the things that I really like to do with people that I consider successful in life is to go back into kind of history and understand the things that happened early in life, the foundations that were set, the lessons that were learned that enabled somebody to achieve success in their career. And so it seems to me, me knowing you and your background, you were a successful engineer at Delphi. You had a great engineering career there and probably learned a lot of things and developed as a leader. And then at some point decided that you wanted to transition and become an entrepreneur. That is a huge leap, right? That's a huge leap of faith. But even before that, you grew up. Memory serves me correctly, Davison, Michigan.
That's where it started.
Yeah, and you were an all-star athlete in basketball, all-star athlete in football. You're recruited by colleges and universities around the country, and that also has to have a profound impact on you and how you look at life, how you deal with obstacles and adversities, how you prepare. You won a college scholarship, went and competed for the Division III national champion in college and football. And so I want to tease out and just understand a little bit about how those experiences prepared you to be a leader and an entrepreneur, because I would imagine that there's things there that completely impacted you and set you up for success later on in life. Am I mistaken, or is that a true statement?
It's funny because a lot changed really quick. When I started off in corporate America, I just had this naivety, if you will, or naiveness, if you will, that I was going to climb the corporate ladder and the world was my oyster. And early on in my career, before I really went full bore into manufacturing engineering, I was doing some internal engineering and internal sales, and I was part of a fifth cutback. And when the employer pulled me in and I got that tap on my shoulder at 10 a.m. and I think it was a Wednesday morning, they informed me it had nothing to do with performance, but had to do with profits. And, being part of a fifth cutback, you're no longer in the fat at that point. You're into the bone pretty much. And it really shook my confidence early on, because here I was going to climb the corporate ladder, stake my flag, if you will, and make a claim. And I'd worked hard and found myself on the other end of that stick. And thankfully, I had a coworker at that location very disappointed about the company's decision to let me go, and got me an interview at a major manufacturer, Delphi, as you mentioned, who was one of the sole suppliers to GM at the time. And very quickly, I got a job full-time as a manufacturing engineer and was tasked with bringing in these multi-million-dollar production lines. And very quickly into that game, mid-2000s started to hit, and most of us would probably recognize what happened with the economy not too long after. But I was actually at the front end. My job, for the first year or two was bringing in these multi-million-dollar production lines and all the stress and all the responsibility, and working alongside other very gifted engineers to literally take them from design to what we called PPAP, right into full-scale production for GM. It was only a year and a half, 2 years into that game where I started getting tasked with taking them out of production. And what everybody knew only a handful of years later, I was at the front end, knowing that things were shifting. And the joke was that the Michigan hand, you can use your hand when you're from Michigan to point where you're from. But the joke within the engineers was that hand was, all the engineering jobs that were waving bye-bye. We knew that engineers coming in no longer could just take the job. They had to take the job with a passport because, at the time, the cars were made in Flint and you couldn't drink the water in Mexico. And very quickly, a short time later, all the cars were being made in Mexico and you couldn't drink the water in Flint. But I guess my rose-colored glasses having been shattered just a little bit when I got that tap on the shoulder, understanding what I know now, it was no fault of my own, but when you're a young, aspiring, climb the corporate ladder, career-oriented individual, it definitely hit me and landed a little differently.
So you went from being a company man to saying, maybe I ought to start my own company.
Oh, my goodness. And the motive really, as it relates to your question with becoming an entrepreneur, the motive was very quickly recognized that there wasn't the security that I was looking for. And I probably wouldn't have been able to say it this way at the time, but I realized that the security or the floor that I was seeking really wasn't there at the level in which I had anticipated it would be. But the ceiling that I was willing to work so hard for literally had a cap in that environment and in that game. And that's neither good nor bad. It just wasn't what I was seeking. I was seeking for the ceiling to be removed and some of the quest to be able to be, established on my own will and work ethic, if you will, right out of the game.
So that kind of leads into, I can see how that experience would enable or empower a person to be like, you know what, I'm not gonna play this game anymore. I can't control it. I'm doing great, but I don't have control of my own destiny.
Yeah, Bob, it's not to cut you off there, but it's really funny when I look back, like my reward for doing well there was more of what I didn't want. Like I wanted time with family. If you'd have asked me my priorities at the time, as they are today, it would have been faith, family, finances. But if you'd looked at my life, it was finances, fit the rest in. And so for doing a job well done there, what I found was I got more stress, more responsibility. And I figured at the age of 28, going in for a stress test probably wasn't a good sign of what my future held. But yet that's where I found myself.
So you made a big leap.
Big leap.
Huge leap of faith. There's a lot of people who talk about doing this. There's a lot of people who aspire to do it, but are too afraid to actually do it until everything's got to be just perfect. You got to, right? And I think you and I both, in our experiences, have made leaps of faith in life where you just know it's like you're literally crafting the airplane on the way down, and you're like, I hope I get liftoff before I hit the bottom, right?
That's right.
So one of the things that you and I, not only you and I both made multiple leaps of faith within our career, but you and I also are former college athletes. And I want to understand how maybe your athletic experience and your athletic background, being an all-star athlete in high school and then being recruited by colleges all over the country and going and competing at the top level, how did that prepare you for your entrepreneurial journey?
Sure.
Were there principles that you were able to leverage, things that you learned on the athletic field, the discipline, whatnot, that helped you during that time frame where you were taking this huge leap of faith?
Yeah, it's interesting how you set that up because I was a big fish in a small pond, right? Anybody that's had some athletic background success realizes once you go from the high school level to the collegiate level, everyone's good. You're pulling all the big fish from their ponds from around the country. And I came very quickly to the reality that athletic ability wasn't going to carry the day any longer. It was going to be work ethic. And so there's just principles you learn in athletics that you really have a hard time replicating in other places. Doing things that you don't want to do for the purpose of a team, doing things that you don't want to do that rise above self-interest, doing things that you don't want to do because someone else will discipline you if you don't do them, right? So there's some self-discipline that comes in, not just when you're under the lights, but when you're in the darkness per se, when you're not in the game. I guess for me, one of the things that shook me early on when I started my entrepreneurial journey was up to that point, so many things had seemed to come so easy that I naturally was arrogant enough maybe to think that entrepreneurship would come easy for me as well. And I really realized, there were some things that needed to change about the individual looking in the mirror that ultimately would become, and I don't like this word, but worthy of being followed in that capacity, because there was a great gap between where I was, where I needed to be in order to be able to attract that success that ultimately we were looking for.
The thing that strikes me is that there seems to be a false narrative regarding entrepreneurship. It's talked about. You see the Shark Tank episodes, right? It's like, I'm going to go in there and raise some money, and it's going to be super
Are you
easy.
calling me Mr. Wonderful?
I'm not calling you Mr. Wonderful, but it is I've heard somebody recently remind me is that being an entrepreneur, being in business, it is a full contact sport, 24/7. And it's a slugfest. It's uphill. It's grind it out every single day. And I think a lot of people don't realize that. And the few that take the leap are anticipating, maybe falsely so, that's just, it's super easy. It's just magically going to happen, right? Yep. And don't realize how much discipline, how much work ethic goes into actually being a successful entrepreneur. And so I would imagine that your athletic background, it's the thing I love about athletics. It's one of the reasons why I have my children in it, is because I think you are able to see tangible results early on. I mean, like, hey, if I work really hard, I don't have this particular skill set, but I get better. And you can track how you're getting better day after day, week after week, year after year. You start hitting milestones and achievements. And for me in business, I've been able to leverage that learning experience from my athletic background and discipline and so forth. And I've seen you do that as a business leader within our own business and the business pursuits that you've had. Tell me about your time as a football player and a basketball player. What were some of the big things that you learned and that you were able to tease out and leverage in business?
So one of the greatest things I've had to learn, and still probably at some level, is this concept of humility. And I needed to learn it in spades early on, and God gave me many opportunities to learn the lesson. In high school, we had won a certain level of success as a junior, and we were on a championship team. And the expectations were very high our senior year, and that's where the recruiting was really starting to flow, was from the basketball pursuit. And I nearly didn't play my senior year of football, so I could strictly focus on that endeavor.
You're going to go all in on basketball.
I was going all in, man. All the chips were being pushed to the middle of the table, and my mom and her wisdom really encouraged me to play my senior season in football, just because I'd played for so many years. And the truth is, I enjoyed the sport, right? And
did you guys beat Grand Blanc that year?
I'll just say yes.
Okay.
Didn't we always?
Okay. Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. But, so for those listening, both TJ and I we were in the same conference, right?
That's
so
right.
You went to Davison High School. I went to Grand Blanc High School. We weren't there at the same times, but
that's true.
Big nine.
That's true. Back in the day. But it was really crazy because in that season, I had actually a really good football season, even better than probably anticipated. Played both ways, and recruiting started actually flowing from football, and then basketball season occurred. And early on in my season, of which started as we would have hoped, had 8 points through the first quarter of one of the games, actually, when I came down from a rebound and watched my ankle go sideways and my foot stood still.
Man.
It was a pretty dramatic ankle sprain. They told me that if I'd have broke my ankle, it might have even been better. So it wasn't the season we were hoping for. I'll just say that. And some of the recruiting tailed off for basketball.
So you had to learn how to deal with disappointment and setbacks and obstacles.
And even when I was able to come back that year, which I was able to, I was a shell of the individual that I should have been that season. And so it was to other people's standards, it was a good season. I had good numbers, but to my own standards and what I knew was possible, it was a huge disappointment.
How did you deal with that as an athlete, where you have this internal expectation, knowing that you can perform at a certain level and you're not? Everyone else around you is like, oh, this is great, you're still doing a great job, but you're internally, you're not measuring up to what you wanted to do.
It's a huge gut check. So being from the Flint, Michigan area, we played a lot of teams that had individuals that went on to play in the NBA, NFL, so we were around a lot of, at the time, professional talent. The game I came back against a school by the name of Clarkston, Michigan, had a gentleman that was a couple years younger than I, but went on to play at Indiana University. And it was my first game back, and they washed the floor with us. I don't even think I could have guarded the third best player that day, just because I couldn't function and move. And so it's a difficult struggle in anything where you have a mindset of what you feel like you should be able to accomplish, and maybe just don't feel like you're equipped with the tools to be able to achieve what you have in your mindset. And then doubt starts to creep in, right? Self-doubt starts to creep in, and your confidence starts to get shaken. And as much as I was disappointed and maybe struggled with that event in the moment of the content of it, if you will, I didn't truly understand the context of it and how it would start to shape me and form me for what would only happen a year later when I went to accept a football scholarship and went to play football. Trained all summer to do what was more naturally my position, which was tight end. I had to put on some weight, and so I spent the summer lifting weights, putting on weight, and training for the cardio conditioning metrics that they had set for tight ends, only to get invited to an early camp for a select group of freshmen. And first day of camp, the coach came over, defensive coach, head coach came over, tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, we watched a lot of your film. We really were impressed, and we'd actually like you to entertain coming over and potentially being the starting safety." And of course, they fed that ego. And you ever say something where you say it and then you really wish you maybe hadn't said it? So I said, yeah. And thinking that was a good answer until later that day conditioning started. And now I was running and doing sprints with defensive backs, which physically are just structured differently than tight ends that I'd spent my whole summer training to become. And had a miserable camp because my body just was basically asking, what are you doing to me?
Right.
As I was being asked to do different tasks that I had spent my whole summer training to do something different with.
Putting a Clydesdale in a Kentucky Derby.
Oh, goodness. That's a good analogy. That's exactly what I felt like, because it felt very heavy trying to do the things I needed to do, and just had a terribly disappointing season, ultimately to the point where we had started a family at that time and decided to walk away from football actually after one season, when you had all these great expectations, built in going there and foreseeing a long career, in what we were doing there. So
that has to have a little bit of foreshadowing of you being an entrepreneur. Because I've never met an entrepreneur that says, you know what, it was amazing. I had this idea, and we started this company, and everything just fell into place, and the money tree was growing out of every single office, and we were just printing money, and there was no issues.
Yeah,
Obviously, it's quite the opposite, right? It's
totally
obstacle, prepare for one thing, build something out, only to come in and be like, you know what, we got to pivot and go in a completely different direction. We're ill-prepared for this. So it's just, that's the nature of the beast of business, right? It's just the pivoting and iterating. So do you draw upon those experiences in your entrepreneurial journey? And that maybe let's call it maybe muscle memory, right? That muscle memory. Now you're applying it in a different area of life, but how has that helped you or prepared you for what you're doing currently?
Yeah. So some people might say I'm stubborn. I would just say I'm committed, right? And so one of the things those experiences really did for me is there were some things that were outside of my circle of control at that time, in athletics. But one of the things I really have learned to appreciate and look for, and you and I have had this conversation, albeit you probably didn't realize my specific intent behind asking you some of these questions quite some time ago, but you never know what you got in the good times. Anybody can be the leader and succeed in the times when things are thriving. You really find out who you have and whose you have, meaning what they stand for in times when there's difficulty and struggle. And I don't know if you remember, but when one of the times we sat down, I had asked you about some of the struggles you had and wanted to understand those, because I was more interested in how you had responded to some of that than the fact that you had the struggles, right? And I think there's a lot of truth and value found in sharing some of these stories, because to me, it's not if somebody fails, it's how do they manage that experience. And I didn't manage it perfectly. I managed it poorly in some cases, but I didn't stop and I didn't quit. And when we became entrepreneurs, I had enough life experience at that point to realize, you know what, I do have a competitive spirit. I do have a winner's spirit, and I am willing to learn. And there were lessons that I didn't seize the moment in athletics, that had I done that and not just relied on talent alone, that I would have had a better experience. You know, it's easy to rely on talent alone when something comes very naturally to you until you're around other people that are equally as talented. And then it comes down to work ethic. You know, like people sometimes ask me, do you think you could become a professional athlete? That was always my dream as a kid. But the fact is, there's no way I was set up to become a professional athlete because my work ethic didn't demand it. But knowing what I know now, I believe anybody, short of some physical, shortcoming, can be what they choose to be if they're willing to put in their 10,000 proverbial hours, right? If they're willing to master their craft. And it was something I hadn't done at that time because I just floated along on talent. And what I realized when I became an entrepreneur was talent is not enough. There's skills that you need to learn that are available to anybody, that anybody can take the time to learn. But unfortunately, my sports experience proved that I hadn't done the things necessary, and I really didn't want to repeat that mistake again.
One of the things that I see in you in how you use maybe setbacks or obstacles early in your career to help you have success later in your career. It's almost as if those failures are almost like a vaccine that helped you become stronger to be able to overcome the obstacles that you were going to have later on down the road. I mean, I look at my life in a similar type fashion of, those obstacles can either be something that makes you stronger, i.e. a vaccine, or they can be something that completely derails you and say, you know what, I quit, I give up, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm reading a book currently when they're talking about how the younger generation, especially in secondary schools, we're teaching our children that failure is bad, and where they're so risk adverse, they don't want to get an answer wrong, they don't want to fail a test, they don't want to take any type of risk that could lead to some type of failure. And it's like, man, my goodness, we are developing a generation to create companies, to be an entrepreneur, to create jobs, to be successful. You've got to take risk. You've got to put it all out there. And the only way you get used to taking those risks, and when you take a risk, guess what? You're going to fail. You're going to fail, and then you're going to have success, is to experience failure and get through it. So as I see how you are you are extremely strong and resolute in how you lead within our company and how you motivate folks. And I think, I asked you those particular questions with intentional design just because I wanted to be able to tease this out, because I think that those setbacks that you had early in your career enable you to be uber strong now in your journey and how you lead and what you do with us currently.
Well, it's interesting, and maybe the only so first of all, I've never thought about it the way you just positioned it, but I think there's a lot of truth and value in what you just gleaned that maybe I've never even taken the time myself to flesh out. There is a principle that I think any aspiring entrepreneur needs to learn, which is backcasting, where they start and begin with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey talks about, and almost mentally put themselves into a future position, and then be able to work backwards, right, to take the sequence of steps in order to get where they want to go. Another one that can be somewhat dangerous for people, but is equally as important, is this concept of pre-mortem. And I'm not talking post-mortem when you're done and we're doing an autopsy, because we can't bring you back to life. But a pre-mortem is you do this almost the same thing as backcasting, where you go to that future, but you experience in your mind a negative outcome. And then if you're able to, with a level of maturity and emotional intelligence, figure out what caused that failure so that you didn't reach that desired end, then when you incur those obstacles along your path, you're more emotionally prepared to be able to adjust to ultimately change the outcome that you're looking for. We hear all this modern talk, and some of it lives in reality of always, staying positive and focusing on the future, and, wherever you put your mind, move in that direction, and all that is true. But I think there's some value and strengthening, maybe is the right word, of having this pre-mortem mindset in tandem with that, because I'm not here advocating negativity, but I am advocating responsibility and preparation. And so if somebody is able to take themselves there and imagine a failed outcome, then ultimately as they incur some of the obstacles that led to that failed outcome, they're more properly positioned and better equipped to be able to more quickly make the adjustments to get the outcome that they're looking for.
Well, let's make a hard pivot.
Okay.
One of the things that I really admire and respect about you, there's a whole bunch of them, but most people have a complete and utter fear of public speaking. And I've watched you, and everybody has a different type of public speaking style, right? And, some people, they come off as they're just very maybe unscripted, off the cuff, and just kind of fly by the seat of their pants. And one of the things that I've noticed about you, and you're a very gifted public speaker, a great communicator and orator, but your style is also a lot different than what I've noticed with others. It comes across as it's very scripted. You can tell that you've put thought and energy into what you're about ready to say. It's almost as if every word, every phrase has been carefully chosen. I was like, when you speak, people immediately listen and open up and start taking notes, right? And so I want to unpack that a little bit, because in the back of my mind, as I've watched you give these talks and communicate, it's not something that just happens. And so I'd love to understand a little bit about how you approach that. Do you prepare? Do you have notes? Do you practice at your house? I envision you maybe like in your basement, kind of like walking around, actually delivering a talk. I was just kind of curious.
The jokes I practice at home with my kids, but no, I'm teasing. It's a natural byproduct of being an engineer, of course, right? All engineers are great speakers. I'm kidding, right? I used to work with car parts. I always tell people because they didn't talk back. So they say that the number one greatest fear of man is public speaking, meaning they'd rather die than, public speak. And I was probably there when we started. I'd much rather be somebody that was in the casket versus the guy giving the eulogy, if you will, right? Like I just didn't have an interest in public speaking until someone offered me a really different perspective. And first of all, that's an awful high compliment to be paid, so I appreciate that. I don't know that I'm deserving of it, but while I do prepare and put effort, because I want to always give a dollar to value proposition of whoever I'm speaking to. I want to offer some value for their time, because while hopefully they respect my time, they're showing up by definition. I should return that favor. And I guess the progression was one of specific intent. I think if you would have heard me start to speak when we first began, public speaking, I don't know that would have been at the top of the list of where we would have been starting this podcast, because you might have been taking a nap during the podcast. It was not a glamorous starting point. But I remember early on asking a mentor, how can I improve in this area? If I have a message in my heart, how do I go about communicating that where I can reach the most people, right? Because we know there's all different types of personality styles, all different learning styles, and they all don't relate to the one I had at the time, which was very analytical, detail-oriented. And one of the best pieces of advice I was given is, when you're in the crowd listening to other people that you consider to be a great communicator, watch their style. Don't just take notes on the content, take notes on the delivery. And I started, 15 years ago, roughly, just studying people that are incredible communicators and tried to figure out how do they reach a diverse group of people, so that, if there's 100 people in the room, not only are the 25 that are like you capturing some value, but how do you reach the maximum number of people? And so it was a journey of specific intent, and then quite frankly, a lot of failure to get to the point where, again, don't know that I'm worthy of that compliment, but hopefully I've improved over the years.
Well, I think one of the things I've noticed is that in the entrepreneurial journey, being able to communicate in a whole facet, in a whole wide-ranging number of areas is extremely important. Whether at the very beginning of an entrepreneurial journey where you're selling and you're promoting and you're maybe you're pitching an idea, all the way to whether you're communicating with your bankers. Communication is like a central tenet, something that you have to be able to do. Yeah. And most people, as we said before, are scared of it. But this is a skill set. It's one of those soft skills that a lot of times don't get taught in colleges or universities, and people just kind of pick it up over time. And so when I see somebody who is excelling in a particular area that is extremely critical in the entrepreneurial journey, I just want to kind of tease that out. And So I've had people who have given me tips along the way.
Sure.
So, oh, hey, what you need to do is you got to rehearse this, or you've got to have your notes, or be very scripted. And when I've found in my journey that I've had to just develop a style that's true to who I am and my skill sets and my abilities. So if I try, and I know kind of where that is, and so it's easy for me if I can deliver content within that style, I feel comfortable. But if I try to deliver content and be like, okay, I'm going to be like my dad. My dad's a pastor. He's a communicator. His entire career has been about communicating. I can't deliver a talk like my dad does. And there's a whole host of people that'd be like, oh, I'm going to copy that person. I couldn't copy you and do what you do because it wouldn't come off as natural. So I think it's really interesting how every individual needs to find their flow, their unique way of communicating. And I think you do that very, very well.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because to me, one of the other great pieces of advice I was given when I was very fearful of taking a stage and what are people thinking of me and how I'm delivering this message was, my first concern was, what are you going to say? That people would even want to listen to. And what I found was, at the time I was very involved with athletics, cared a whole lot about football. I still enjoy watching a football game. That's not the point, but my life revolved around it at this point. And so it was very easy to engage in a conversation about an interest. And so one of the things I learned over time was that the more I had interest in other areas of life, the more education I was exposed to, the more capacity I had, and the more I had to offer of value. And so it started to take the pressure off, because it wasn't so much trying to deliver something you didn't know anything about as much as things you had learned. And one of the greatest analogies or parallels that I think I learned early on, and I've heard it repeated here recently from a personal friend, is what I call the tackle box perspective, meaning each of us carry a tackle box in our life, and most people go through their whole life, opening their tackle box and pulling the lure out that they think will work the best. And there's a lot of trial and error with that. And with trial and error comes a lot of pain and failure experiences. And there's failure in everything. That's not the point, as much as how do you mitigate some of that. And so one of the things that I've learned is within my tackle box, I try to do the best I can to learn from Bob Dickey's tackle box, and the lures that he's excelled in and has experience in, and the lessons that I can glean from him, and take the lures that he has proven to work and put them in my tackle box. So the next time I'm opening my tackle box in that area, I can pull a lure out that's no longer has to be under the guise of trial and error for myself, but already has proven experience and results.
Well, that's great. When you mentioned earlier the things that maybe you're scared of or you're not scared of. I mean, it strikes me as a former athlete, or maybe you're still in athletics in some way, shape, or form.
Are you saying I'm getting older?
No, I'm just saying that you're wearing an athletic shirt right now. It looks like you could go take a football field. I shouldn't mention the University of Tennessee football team because they got beat so bad last weekend by Georgia State, but. You and I are going to go watch the BYU game, and it looks like you could take the field today as a linebacker.
Is that because I'm holding the water bottle? Is that the reason?
That's right.
The water boy?
Yeah, but from a business standpoint, are there things that you are scared of today? I mean, you said early on in your career you may have been a bit fearful or apprehensive of taking the stage in public speaking. I mean, most people will say that is one of their greatest fears in life, is getting in front of a group of people, being vulnerable and communicating. Obviously, that's not a fear of yours today.
I have a great fear in my life today, but it's very different than the fears I had before. One of the pivots that I made in my life, or the transitions, was as I realized and put less focus on self and the thoughts that consumed me of what other people were thinking, as an example. And the more I pivoted and started realizing what my purpose was, my fear today is not so much on what I'm going to deliver, how I'm going to deliver it, what people are going to think of that delivery. Has a whole lot more to do with the fear that I live with today of, am I fulfilling the purpose and passions that I have in my life? It comes with the relief of taking pressure off you, but it also comes with a different set of fears, because, they say life's a lot like a roll of toilet paper. The closer you get to the end, the faster it speeds up, right? And here I am, post 32, but post 40. And I guess I just value and appreciate and understand the essence of time. And I have a big calling on my life. And with that, I don't want to waste any of that time. And so the fear that I have is very different today, where I'm purpose and passion driven, because I don't want to miss the opportunity to fulfill what that calling is in my life versus are people going to appreciate my delivery style, or it's less about me at this point, right?
So you obviously have a purpose that is driving you, that you're focused in on. Do you find yourself ever contemplating work-life balance in the context of, you being focused on your pursuit and your purpose and what you're trying to do in life? Is that something that you think about?
Absolutely. So it is a constant struggle. Where I think we're able to be a little uniquely different is that we bring our family into our entrepreneurial experience. So it's not just a compartmentalized piece of our life, because we get to fulfill the calling that we have, and it changes lives, certainly makes money. We get to have a ton of fun, but ultimately for the purpose of changing lives, our kids get to be brought into that. We welcome them into those environments. And I'm not proud to say, but it wasn't always that way. Like, right. I didn't want to be interrupted. I didn't want to have them coming in a meeting. I didn't want all that interruptions, because I wanted a very professional setting, because I was brought up as a professional, right? As a manufacturing engineer, and sat in a lot of boards with a lot of important decision makers. And that's just the mode of operation I was taught. But I guess I didn't realize maybe it didn't have to be that way. And so it definitely spills in, because I'm a thinker. And once my mind turns on, it's very, very difficult to turn it off. And there's certain boundaries we have to put in place, whether it be with technology or whatever. I may have my phone on silent, but if I see somebody calling, I may be with my family at the moment and not answer it, but my wife would be the first to tell you, and we're not going to let her, but she'd be the first to tell you that while I'm physically there, I'm mentally maybe not there.
Well, I've had an interesting discussion recently with a couple of young people that I've been mentoring. And a lot of times, especially in the millennial generation, the conversation a lot of times turns back to work-life balance. How do we have proper work-life balance? And there's been a number of books that have been written on it, and I've kind of thought about it. And I'm starting, I think, to somewhat change my mind. And I'm still working it out, but in terms of the whole work-life balance, because look, as a family man, I'm married 25 years now, coming up on 25 years. I have 6 kids, and they are the number one most important thing in my life, that I'm outside of my relationship with God and my faith walk. It's my everything that I do is for my family, and
sure.
But I've been struggling with it because people have been saying, well, proper work-life balance, and where I'm at personally right now is I'm very much out of balance in terms of, if you were to take a look at time.
Sure.
And so, I've been kind of struggling with that whole mindset of, is there such a thing as work-life balance, or are you able to be, all in and doing the things that are required of you in a entrepreneurial pursuit, and at the same time making sure that my relationship with my wife, my relationship with my kids are still very first and foremost.
Sure.
But I mean, it is not even Steven right now if you were to take a look at the hours spent.
Yeah.
And so I've had some really interesting discussions on, is a true work-life balance possible in the entrepreneurial world of what you and I are doing. I'm just kind of curious how you think about that. How do you process it? Do you have something different that you...
Well, the awareness is always there, because they say the very raw definition of entrepreneurship is fear of starvation, right? It's just, there's a reality that in there lies. And even if as an individual, maybe somebody gets past that point, you still have that burden or trust or responsibility with those that are in your trust, right? And so that weighs on you as an entrepreneur and as a leader of other entrepreneurs and other leaders, to make sure that you're fulfilling what you've committed to in that capacity. And so for me, I don't know that we'll ever have that right. I guess my greatest prayer is that the evidence of that will be found in our children and the decisions they make. Like, I look at you, Bob, and it's somewhat intimidating. I look at you and you got your coffee cup over there and it says Harvard Business School, right? I've never been to Harvard Business School. You look at your oldest daughter, and the success she's seeing, and just the evidence, the outward evidence of what her walk is and where her priorities are. And it's just, it's an admirable thing that can only be pointed back to, one, the grace of God, in my opinion, but number two, then the guidance and the example you've given her. And I like to hope that within our family structure that our kids are an example of some of the right decisions we've made, because we've certainly made plenty of wrong ones. And so therein lies the managed frustration, if you will, of knowing you'll never get it right, but hoping that living the right way, or attempting, to always live the right way, knowing every day you'll get it wrong, that your kids will see that. And I guess if there's one breakthrough Brandy and I have had over the last 5, 6, 7 years is not hiding that from our kids, letting them into a little bit of, not into the depth of it, not the second and third and fourth order consequence, but understanding it's okay. It's okay to fall down. It's okay to have failure. It's okay to step out and risk and be wrong, but to give them the example of how you manage that, because the truth is, the world is going to teach them that lesson, and we have the first opportunity in the world to teach them how to manage that lesson. And maybe years ago we tried to protect them from that. But at some level, I think there's a healthiness that comes alongside of that too.
Jack Welch just came out with a new book. I think it's the title of it is a Real World MBA. And the thing I was thinking about as I have that book on my desk, it's one of the next books I'm going to be reading. But to your point, with a business where you're able to bring your children along and have them be part of what you're doing and see what's happening, I think that the experiences that our kids get from being in that room at the dining room table, hearing how mom and dad are talking about business and whatnot, is probably some of the most valuable experiences and learning experiences that they get in a whole host of areas. And so, I know that you're very intentional with your kids. I've been around you enough. I've been at your home and see how you live life, and they're a part of your life and very much a part of your business. I'm trying to do the exact same thing, and I think that it's something that oftentimes gets overlooked in terms of a benefit of being an entrepreneur and having a business and having your family be a part of it.
Yep.
Of allowing your children to they see real world example. It's a real world MBA for your kids as they're sitting there and speaking into it.
Let me actually give you an example on this, because I know you and I have had offline discussions before about raising, let's say, the younger generation. Age doesn't even matter, but let's say as they're pre or entering teenage years, and how much rope, I think, is the analogy that I remember, is the right amount of rope. And it's not always age dependent. It may be maturity dependent. Right. And that's probably one of the greatest, most difficult things for a parent to figure out, because it's not always the same amount of rope. And I was reminded of, you just used the word intentionality, and Brandy and I really try hard to be intentional in those areas of our lives. And I believe all of our lives have seasons, right? And so the same intentionality we have today in our family will be different than what we have 5 years from now. But I joined a fantasy football league with some friends from church, and we just moved down to southeast coastal Georgia here a couple years ago.
Georgia.
Coastal Georgia, yeah. And it's important to designate that, because there's only 90 miles or so of coastal frontage on Georgia. So
there's a big difference between coastal Georgia and the rest of Georgia.
I believe there's a huge difference. Okay. Yeah. It's called the ocean and the breeze. Yeah. But I joined this team just honestly just for some fun, right? Just to develop some relationship with these guys, and I enjoy football, so it just gave me an additional interest. But I used to play it all the time 15 years ago, and pulled a lot of those things out of my life. Some of them were healthy to pull out, because you can only focus in so many areas. But as I've now joined this league, the first one for well over a decade, it's reminded me of how intentionality is so important and how it draws your focus. And let me give you the example. So the first game that my player played in was last night.
Okay.
And I had zero interest in the game. No interest. I don't care for either of the teams, at least not to take 3 hours of my life. And I certainly didn't watch the whole game even last night. But I did tie in because I had a player in that game that was potentially going to score me some points. Yeah. And it reminded me very quickly of how both positive and fun it can be, but also how dangerous something like that can be, because there is only so much time that people can place in a day, right? There is no such thing as the 25th hour. And wherever you put your focus is where your focus becomes. And you can't focus on everything. You can't be great at everything. And certainly intentionality does matter. And so it was just a quick reminder last night, while I'm going to enjoy this league and I'm going to have fun, and it gives us something to cut up about a little bit as we tease each other week by week when we play each other. I'll still have to guard my natural instinct, which is to be all into whatever it is that I'm in. Because if I'm all in something there, then it's stealing some time from somewhere else, right?
When you hear the word successful, who comes to mind? If you were to think about a person, it's like, okay, this person's successful. This person's been successful in life. What's the first name that comes to your mind?
Yeah, well, the first one, and not because she's just sitting here, would be my wife, truthfully. She's given up a lot that the world could look at that would define her success to be what she set out to be successful in. And it's not her success, or what we would deem her success, is maybe not the ideal of everyone's success, or maybe even nor should it be. But she gave up an opportunity as she was going through school to go work full time when we were young so that I could go to school. And it was strictly an economic decision because we knew engineers would get paid more than what she was going down the path of. But I have a lot of respect for her because she did what she needed to do in that season to allow us to structure our family in a way that we could hopefully better our life, right? And then, I could literally go through season after season of how she's sacrificed. But yet, when I look at her and the growth, I'm not proud to say this, Bob, but she actually grew in our marriage and the desire to be intentional there, and as a parent well before I did, which kind of magnetically pulled me in that direction. And so a lot of the accolades I get today, it's no surprise that I have a very strong woman, not behind me, but beside me in this thing we call life. And I just really admire her, and I try to tell her every day how much of a success she is, because she doesn't have the degrees that some people might define success, and rightfully so in its own context. She may not have set out and started 18 different businesses and made them all wildly successful like some people may define success, and maybe rightfully so. But she's defined clearly what she wanted certain seasons of her life to be, and she's become the best at those seasons. And so I know I just got some extra points, hopefully, but it's the honest truth.
She's got a big smile on her face from ear to ear over here, so we're going to have to drag her in here and maybe ask her some questions.
And so there's two sides of that coin. The other people that I would define success, I'm looking at one of them, first of all, and I've told you that privately, so I'm not just saying that for your benefit here publicly, but I really have admiration for people that have defined greatness in a different way than maybe what the world does. And I also am excited when they achieve success as the world defines it, but have done it based off the right platform.
One thing I like that you've highlighted, especially regarding your wife Brandy, is that she was intentional in understanding what success meant for her.
That's right.
And then crafting and engineering her life to be able to obtain it.
Yeah.
And I think so many young people, and I'll say that I started out that way as well. I had a picture of what success was being defined as, and you can chase whatever somebody else tells you what success is going to be and then obtain it and be like, oh, I'm not happy. Yep. I thought this was going to fulfill me, complete me, all those types of things. Be like, this is not. So it takes a lot of intentional soul searching, a deep self-awareness, and especially when you're younger, at least I wasn't smart enough to understand what it was, and so I had to ask other people who were ahead of me, people who I admired, and be like, what did you do? How did you live your life differently? How did you think and process differently to obtain what looks like a really successful life? And it sounds like, Brandy, I'm going to ask you a question. It sounds like that's exactly what you did. Can you speak in it? And did you know early on what you wanted your life to be like, or was this a journey of self-discovery? And I know you're going to be so mad at me for dragging you into this because I told you I wasn't going to ask you any questions.
I know I'm a little upset with you, but I'm mad at Tim mainly. But it's kind of funny because my mom would tease me because when I was younger, she would ask what I wanted to do or whatever, and I'd say, I don't know, I had this vision of this house, and when Tim and I got married, I wanted to be a mom. And so for me, those sacrifices of, choices that we had to make along the way, it's like, well, we can have more stuff or we can back off on certain things and you can have that choice. And then when we got to being a business together, it was like, well, this was an opportunity for us to make extra income so that I could have that choice to be a mom. And so what I just told Tim actually the other day was, man, for the season that I'm in, I have lots of other passions. I have things that I am super passionate about that I do want to put some time into. But right now, I still have 3 kids at home. We have 4 total, but I have 3 at home, and that's my focus. This is the season that I'm in, and so that's the time that I'm going to invest in. So when things come our way, then that's what Tim and I look at. Like, is this going to pull me away from what I'm meant to be right now?
I haven't seen too many entrepreneurs. I'm speaking now married couples. Okay, so granted, the demographic that I'm pulling from, my friends and peer group and so forth. But those within my peer group who are married couples who are entrepreneurs, I can't think of even one couple now, right, that one of them is the entrepreneur and the other one's like completely disengaged. It's almost always where if it's a couple that they're both passionate about the business, whether it's a construction business or a law firm practice, whatever business it is, that they're in some respects doing it together. And you and Tim, I call you TJ, but you and TJ personify that, if you will. Was that a personal choice early on in your marriage to say, look, I want to be a part of this entrepreneurial journey. I want to play an equal part. Was it something that you just grew into? How did that manifest? Because you guys are like this perfect team.
Oh, that's funny. Tim's laughing in the background because he originally wanted to get into business for himself. He basically knew that he didn't want to do engineering forever. And so when he originally got us into business and said, hey, I think we should be entrepreneurs, I'm like, oh, man, that just sounds like something you should do. I don't have the skill set for it. First of all, like you said, I didn't go to college, so there's no way I thought I could run side by side with them in a business. I didn't have any business mindset. But I do remember him saying, man, I'm excited about this. Will you please can you be neutral and just come along with me? Mm-hmm. And so I think anybody who loves their spouse, they're going to look at him and go, oh, sure, I can be neutral. And so, of course, I was along the way. But then it was such an incredible environment. I just wanted to be around the people. I started falling in love with, what we were doing. And then, it took us a long time to figure out how to work together because we've never done that before. But once we kind of, got that going, and then I just realized, you know what, not only did I want to be a mom, but I wanted to be a wife. And in my personal opinion, if my husband is called in a certain area, in this area he believed he was called in, then I'm called to help him, to be his helpmate. And so I just it took me a long time, but I got to a point where I just really I really felt like I should be helping Tim as much as possible in this. And then, of course, it's been a blessing.
And Bob, I think it's worthwhile to note too here, we're very for if somebody wants to be a career woman, and just the point isn't somebody needs to structure their path the way we've done, right, as much as I think there's something to be learned here from motivation, and having drive. And what drove us was the desire to align our life with our priorities versus the obligations that we were living our life according to at that point. And her desire to be a stay-at-home mom, and in total transparency in those days to get out of debt, when we were young, those were the things that drove us to do the things we didn't know if we could do, believed we would like the changes to happen, but those were the very incentives or motives that drove us to change, right? And to align our life with those priorities. And so whether somebody's driven to be a female entrepreneur, whether they're married or single, it doesn't matter. That's not, don't get lost in the story as much as the principles that the story maybe is teaching.
Well, I mean, very similar, I think, that how we started at the top of the podcast, talking about public speaking and how everybody has their own unique style, their own unique gifting, the way they approach it. I think the entrepreneurial journey is very much like that. There isn't a rule book of here's the one answer to be successful, in an entrepreneurial career. It's multifaceted, it's multidimensional. You've got to pick and choose what works, for you. And I think that you and Brandy have done a marvelous job. I mean, so we're going to be spending time together this week and going to a football game and cooking out, just having a good old time. And when I'm around you and I see you guys together, it strikes me that you doing business and doing life together has made your relationship stronger. I've seen some, very successful people, friends of mine, where I would say, I think that maybe them doing business together may have harmed their relationship, right? Like where it's like the stress comes in, totally. And you can say, maybe they ought to change something up here. But it strikes me as that business and your business has actually helped you guys grow together and into a really nice partnership.
Well, I appreciate that. I think one of the defining moments that if somebody is listening and they're a married couple or even want to enter a business marriage per se, right, with somebody they're going to lock arms with, I think the most defining moment for an aspiring entrepreneur, at least I'll speak on behalf of us, was when we identified what the core purpose of our life was going to be. Like there's a lot of things that I feel, and I don't mean this arrogantly, but there's a lot of things I feel like I could go do to make a lot of money, right? And I could...
Well, anybody who's talented, that's a true statement, right? Absolutely, right?
Absolutely. And so to me, I have the ability to say no to a lot of very lucrative opportunity to be able to fulfill my purpose and passion in the thing that, yes, money is certainly the byproduct of what we do, but our product isn't just being an entrepreneur. Our purpose is wrapped around changing lives. And so we're able to marry that purpose, those passions, and those pursuits, if you will, all into one living arena versus just going out and chasing a paycheck or chasing an income or chasing a bank account. All those things that are neither good nor bad in their proper perspective and proper place, but would be a diversion and a distraction from what we feel as a couple is our purpose for while we're here on this earth. Bob, let me ask you a question, actually, because I've been dying to ask you this question. Like I'm looking at this Harvard Business School, right? Just a setup question to begin with. So are there high school friends that you still stay in touch with, one or two at least, would you say, from the early days?
Yeah, for sure. I've got friends I stay in touch with on Facebook that we went to grade school together.
And here's why I asked the question is because I tease you a lot offline about all the names of people, and I won't name drop for the purpose of this podcast, but Bob's social circle of influencers that exist on the planet today has changed over the years. And from maybe when he was in high school to going through college to aide de camp to a 4-star general, all your progression now into the success you have. How has your relationships with those buddies, I'm assuming it's a small group of them, because at least that's typical for most people as the years go by. How has your relationships changed with those people now that you've entered a very different social circle of influencers when you're with them? Has it changed, I guess, is the first question.
That's a really interesting question. I had an opportunity to go visit a friend of mine from college. Sure. I since I'm here in Knoxville, Tennessee, this is where I went to, I did my undergraduate work. And so I've got a lot of friends in the local area that I still stay in touch with. And what is it, maybe 25 years now? I've graduated. It does not seem that's been that long, right? 25 years, it seems like it was just yesterday. But my wife and I were going to go see a friend of mine who is actually in the hospital here. And it's easy, I think, to revert back to kind of like your thought process and of that time frame, right? And when I go and see a friend group, I can instantly want to start to engage on the topics and the themes and the things that were very important to us during that time frame, right? Sure. And I kind of made a mental note as I went. So it's like that I didn't want to revert back to 18, 19-year-old Bob, but I wanted to engage on a different level with my friend, and we did. But a lot of times the easy thing was it was a college teammate of mine, right? Yeah. And it's really easy for us to go back and just to be thinking about, hey, remember when this, and remember when that, remember we went on this track trip or whatever. And I wanted to have a different type of conversation with him, and so I don't know. There's that gravitational pull to kind of remember back when, and sometimes that can be healthy, sometimes it can't be healthy, sure. Right? But I would say that if I were to, obviously there's a big difference between who I was at the age of 18 versus who I am at the age of 40. I just turned 45, so. But hopefully there's been a story arc of improvement, which I think there is. I've grown and changed as a human being. There's my values are different. My outlook in life is different. I don't know, but I don't know if I'm answering your question. What was? Where am I? Am I close to it, or am I missed the mark?
It's more of a learning opportunity for me because I know each of us have a small group of friends. They say, I think the analytic that I read once was a male has up to 2 to maybe 3 friends that they went to high school with that over time they truly stay in touch with, maybe 1 even, right? And so as I've had some of those experiences, our lives have taken very diverse, but very clearly gapped differences in a lot of ways, not judging good or bad, but just we've made different choices over the years. And as I have conversations with you, I view you as a climber, right? Not somebody that's just camping somewhere and living their days out. And I think Benjamin Franklin said it: most men die at 25; they just wait to 75 to be buried, right? Yeah. And as I've watched you not just wait out your time, but also aspire, I'm curious because life has had a radical difference, but I also see you as a puller upper, as far as grabbing people and just by your very presence, that magnetism pulls people up to want to aspire to be better.
Well, it's a kind compliment. I appreciate that. I want to strive to get better in helping people. That it is a passion of mine, of whether it's with information, but just helping people to achieve more, to live to be the best version of them. How can we be the best version of us? That God's I'm a firm believer that God's put us all here for a reason. That there's no such thing as a mistake, and that we all have a purpose. And how can we help people live out their passion and their purpose to make a difference in the world?
And part of that is asked because, sometimes they ask, what's your productivity hack? And I was sharing with you earlier, the proximity principle, right? And so you're a guy that in my life, I was specific in 10. I try to keep in close proximity because you have the ability to, the more I'm around you, to show the gaps in certain areas of your life, right? And so I think it's important for all of us to really realize that proximity principle is real. And the more it's brought into your life with specific intent, whether it be in parenting, marriage, entrepreneurship, whatever it might be, the less time you'll waste and the more gap you'll fill over time.
Yeah. Well, as you asked that question, one of the things that it jogged my memory of a missed opportunity that I think that I will go to my grave regretting. And it literally happened within the last year. So I was back in Flint, Michigan, and I had been driving down the road where I used to live, and I was between meetings, and I had a couple of minutes of free time. I was like, I'm just going to go drive through my old neighborhood. And a guy that had been my best friend all through childhood. I mean, we went through grade school together, middle school together, high school. So during the summers, we would just spend literally the entire summer camping, biking, right? Best buds. Yeah. And he still lived. He actually had bought his parents' house in that neighborhood and who was still there. And I was driving down the road, and I noticed that his car was in the driveway, his garage door was open, and he was in the garage doing some work, and I hadn't seen him for a couple of years. Sure. And, so my mom and dad at the time still lived there. And I'm like, I'm back here all the time. And there was a split second where I thought, I'm going to pull in and just say hi. I haven't seen him in a while. Yeah. And I thought, no, I'm late for this meeting, and I've got this. That's more important, right? I'm, in the focus. I'll circle back the next time I'm in town. And literally, I was out of the country, but I got a phone call, and I was like, this is odd. This was this guy's brother, and was calling and had made it through, left a voicemail message on my phone that he had literally run into some medical complications and passed away. Wow. And I had literally just been driving down the road and had thought about how I'm going to go in and say hi to him. And it really wrecked me because I was like, man, why didn't I take 10 minutes and just have that conversation, just to rehash and have, and talk with them. And now I never get that opportunity. And I guess it's that battle that I have right now in terms of, we talked a little bit about it, of work-life balance. Sure. And do
you think that causes you to move slower? They say walk slowly through the crowd. I think for me, at least, when I have those types of life experiences where there's a little bit of guilt on the back end of not seizing a moment of maybe more people versus task, because I'm very task oriented by nature.
Yeah.
Do you think that makes you a little more aware of the walking slowly through the crowd and how much more value there actually is there versus maybe the task at the moment?
Oh, for sure. I mean, and so there's been just a litany of examples I could give of whether it's where I've slowed down specifically to be more relational with somebody. So, you know what, I'm going to take time to do this. Yeah. Whereas in the past, I would have been, I got to go, and I got this meeting, I've got this to do, my to-do list, and I was just focus. And so, I don't know, it's little things like that I think that I'm trying to dial it in. I mean, it's going back to your original question about, do you stay in touch with high school and, you know, people back in the day, and that was one where I wish I would have done a better job, and I didn't. But the learning lesson for me is that relationships are everything. Amen. Take time to, you know, the old adage of, you know, take time to smell the roses or enjoy the journey. And I wish I could have that one back. And one of the questions I had here for you is, you know, is there something in life that you wish you could have a do-over on? And for me, there's a whole, I could have a laundry list of do-overs I wish I had. That's one of them. I wish I had a do-over there for that 10-minute conversation with a childhood friend that I hadn't seen for years. So I'm like, I'll get to it next time. Sometimes there is no next time.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. So the question is there?
Well, what would your do-over be? Do you have something that, you know, that you wish that you know, it could be life, business, but if you had a do-over, what would it be?
Yeah. I don't know so there's certainly things that in the moment, knowing what I know now, I would go back and maybe do differently, but I don't regret the outcome of the choices that I, you know, maybe inappropriately made, because to that point with your friend, I think there was, or potentially is, a valuable lesson that makes you more complete and valuable to the planet while you're here, right?
Absolutely.
And so to judge whether that was put in place for that purpose or not is not mine to make. But it does actually remind me of something that I had to learn that I think every successful entrepreneur has to learn at some point too, which is learning not to confuse quality decision-making with the results of those decisions. And it comes from a book that I know you had recommended my way not too long ago, actually. And I picked it up, and I honestly could not set the book down because I felt like it explained certainly my 15 to 17 to 18-year entrepreneurial journey. And had I known it, I would have probably shortened that down to a fraction of the amount of time it took. But I'm certainly thankful for the journey we've taken to get to this point, because it's made me who I am. But that piece of helping me understand, I grew up playing a lot of cards, right? And there was a point in my life where I got into gambling, and it wasn't a good thing. And one of the things this author expressed was that life's a lot more like a game of poker than it is a game of chess, you know. And I'm definitely not the resident chess expert as we sit here today, but as I understand it, there is a exact right move at every movement throughout the game. And when you lose, you can go back and point specifically to the move that you erred in to be able to make a better move to change the outcome. Life isn't always that way. You know, even in the example you just presented, it reminds me of the lesson that I was reminded of in this book, where it's a lot more like poker, you know, where you can make quality decisions and you can make the best decision at every point along, you know, the hand, and the awful fate of luck, if you will, with that last card can cause you to lose the hand. And I think there was many points in my life where I could look at and say, man, I don't like the result of that. But if I go back and question some of the decisions I made, you know, we could evaluate those a little differently. And the resulting, as they called in cards, right? The resulting piece of it is where most people get confused. You know, they say that your results in life will be based on one of two factors: the quality of your decisions and or luck. And there are just things that sometimes are outside of your control that lead to a poor, what you would perceive at least as a poor outcome. But it doesn't necessarily imply that you made bad decisions along the way to get to that outcome. But when I look at my life, it could be paralleled in a lot of ways with that description, because I would judge specifically, as we're talking here today about entrepreneurship, there were points where the scoreboard wasn't really exciting, but I was following the process that I was taught based on that proximity principle of people that had walked that path. And there was a season where I would lay the hammer down and then pull the hammer up and lay the hammer down and pull the hammer up based on the results. And what I had to learn at some point was the results weren't necessarily all based on the success of an entrepreneur wasn't always going to be based on the result of a particular decision as much as if you made enough quality decisions and lined them up for long enough that the odds were in your favor, and just like they are for anybody that will stand that test of time.
Well, very well said. There are lots of examples in my life that I could give that would echo that. Well, number one, thanks for sharing. And Brandy, I want to thank you for impromptu expert over here, just jumped in and answered a couple of good questions. And I really enjoyed getting to understand a little better how you guys kind of live life and do life together, especially as a couple who are building a business, entrepreneurs. And it seems like you've got these success principles down that you guys are leveraging and being very intentional about. And it's I enjoy learning from you guys. I want to ask a couple of rapid fire questions as we close up this episode. All right. So completely random rapid fire questions.
Or as they say in Flint, Michigan, oh boy.
Oh boy. All right. What's an exotic place that you have on your bucket list? Is someplace you'd like to go?
On the bucket list would be Bora Bora.
Really?
One of our favorite places on earth that we visited has been Maui, Hawaii. And we have a goal to get back there here again in the very near future, but Bora Bora would definitely be at the top of the list. And I only say that because friends would send me that when I was sitting in my cubicle, as an engineer, and they'd invite me. I don't know if you've received this email, but the invitation to lunch, on the glass bottom huts, and the crystal blue water, and I would sit back and take 10 seconds out of my stressful fire day, when I worked as an engineer, and just imagine what that day would look like, never really thinking I would ever be the guy that would have the ability to achieve it. But obviously, as times change, your belief window changes and your understanding of what's possible changes. And so that's certainly one of the places we'd like to go.
Brandy, how about you? Do you agree? Bora Bora?
No, I agree. I don't have any place up. Anywhere he's going to be, I'll go.
I was going to say if she disagreed, then I would like to change my answer.
We could have completely changed this entire episode if there was a disagreement on this one. I could
have answered it with honey.
Yeah. All right. Most important skill for an entrepreneur, in your opinion?
I think one of the skills I wish I would have learned, at least on where I'm at in life as my journey as an entrepreneur now, is realizing that important decisions shouldn't be made in the emotion of the decision. That quality decision making versus distinguishing that from the resulting we just talked about. There were many times that we made poor decisions emotionally because of the result, not realizing that we actually had made good decisions that just led to a poor, an undesired outcome. And so that would be one of the biggest ones. Too many people are too willing to make emotional decisions that ultimately will affect the course of their future, and not in a positive way because of the poor result they feel like they're getting, which they then tend to question the decisions when it could have been right.
Okay. Biggest pet peeve?
Mouth noises. Chewing. So I'm not judging, but if you chew with your mouth open, I'm probably looking the other way while we talk. And smacking is a big one. So there's people I know that will chew their gum. We had a big discussion
on this. You were teasing your wife before we started about mouth noises.
With her and probably only her, it's become a really cute attribute because when she gets deep in thought, if she's chewing gum, like she really enjoys that gum. And so what used to be an annoyance has maybe been just a little bit more of an appreciation with her. But other people,
Okay, all right. I'll try to make sure I'm not chewing my hot dog at the football game this weekend too loudly. All right, final one. What book are you currently reading?
It's a great question. The books that I'm currently reading, I probably wouldn't share just because they might not be, in general, the right selections for the audience that's listening, but I will answer it maybe in a different way if that's okay. Yeah. And it's
sure, it's your podcast. Go ahead.
Yeah, there you go. Right, it would be more the less the what and more the why.
Okay,
and I guess it would boil back to that proximity principle, right? So less of what and more of why. What I mean by that is it's not so much relevant the title that I'm reading at the moment as much as how I've gotten to that title. And part of that is I've sought wisdom from people in areas that I'm looking to grow and or that they're looking to have input and wisdom brought onto the table. And so that accountability piece of bringing people within your proximity that you have access to, like there's people that I know, that I don't know at this point in my life, that I already have lists of questions prepared for the moment when I get to meet them, because I'm going to make sure I'm in your luggage or wherever you're going to be. And there's specific things that they've done in their life that I want to bring into my proximity circle so that I can glean from that. And so I guess for me, to answer that question, be less of what I'm reading as much as how I'm coming to that decision. One of the most disappointing, this is a long answer to a short question, but I think it's really relevant. One of the most disappointing things I see in aspiring entrepreneurs is when they take their own advice for all their learning. And I'm not saying there's not a certain healthy aspect to that when you're on just some decompression time or just want general learning. But man, what a long process that you don't have to go through if you'll just seek to bring into your proximity people that are better in areas than what you are currently, or maybe see things in your own blind spots that you don't currently see, but you're not willing to ask that question, right? And so some of the titles I am currently reading come from that guiding light, if you will, versus just my own education, self-taught education, that I'm pulling a book off the shelf because I like the title.
I love the way you answer that question. I've heard this question be asked of a lot of entrepreneurs and senior leaders on various podcasts, and I've never heard that answer. I've heard a lot of people they'll mention that your classic business books. Oh, what's your favorite one? Oh, Good to Great. I mean, there's various business books that are always ranking at the top. 5, top 10. I've literally never heard a senior leader give the answer that you just gave. I think it's one of the things that I admire and respect about you, because you personify for me a lifelong learner, but you're very intentional about it. So instead of just grabbing something that you hear mentioned on a podcast, you're going out to people who are close and near and dear to you and asking intentional questions of, hey, where can I get better? Where can I get stronger? Recommend something specific for me for this next chapter of my life. And you're taking that advice, and I think that's one of the reasons why I like hanging out and spending time with you, because you're so intentional in that area of always scaling up and getting better.
It's not my dad jokes, huh?
Yeah, it's not your dad. Definitely not your dad jokes. Yeah, or your Flint jokes. As a former Flint guy, I don't like it when my hometown gets busted on, but we're both Flint boys, so right. It's all right. Well, Tim, Brandy, thank you so much for being on the show today. Thank you for your wisdom. Thanks for the way that you live your life and the example that you are for people, not only within our business. I love the fact that you and I are business partners, and that we get to work together and kind of do life together. I feel that you help me be a better person, and I feel motivated and inspired to lever up when I'm around you. But more than that, I just want to say thank you for these words of wisdom for our listeners. And for those that are listening today, I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. I hope that you found something, a nugget, a theme, something in our conversation that will help you on your journey, whether you're a aspiring entrepreneur, whether you're a current entrepreneur and you're maybe in the midst of your venture. I hope that what we talked about today is encouraging for you. If you have somebody that you'd like us to interview, somebody that you'd like to have on this show, please send us an email, get in contact with us, and we will do our best to interview that individual. And as always, we're trying to bring the very best to you and to tease out things that they've learned in their journey so that you can be intentional about your path to success. And you don't have to learn by your own mistakes, but you can learn through the mistakes maybe of others and also the successes of others. So I wish you the best in your journey. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Taking the Leap podcast with your host, Bob Dickey. You can keep up with the latest on the podcast at www.takingtheleappodcast.com and bonvera.rocks. You can also find the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever fine podcasts are distributed. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Taking the Leap.